So we're going to check for goodwill impairment on this firm. So there's been a triggering event. There's been political changes that have hurt the company, and so they think there may be a possible problem. And there's a two-step process for testing for goodwill impairment. So step one, you have to check to see if the fair value as a whole, not the collection of individual identified assets, but the fair value as a whole is greater than the book value. So let's say the fair value of a whole they've given to you up here. Notice that adding up the identified assets, you don't get the same, because buying the whole thing, there's some intrinsic value of getting the basket, if you will, including the intangibles that you can't sell, like a trained workforce or proximity to the airport or whatever it is. So anyway, the fair value of the whole, they say, is this $1,425,000, and then the book value of the whole as of the end of the year they give you there. And so the difference so the $160,000, since the book value is higher than the fair value, you have potential impairment of goodwill. And so then you go about doing what is the amount that implied goodwill is. And so now we're going to take the fair value as a whole, and we're going to compare that to, so we already know the fair value of the whole, the fair value of the individual assets. Okay, so that's all of these babies here. Of course, they've done the math for you up there already, but just to show you what's all in there, all the assets and liabilities individually. And so the difference is the implied goodwill. In other words, there's some implied goodwill because the fair value of the whole is greater than the fair value of all the little individually identified assets. And so the implied goodwill here is $100,000. And so we compare that implied goodwill to what goodwill is, and then we write it down to the implied goodwill. So goodwill right now is $400,000, and it should be $100,000. So there's going to be a write down of $300,000. And that's impairment of goodwill. I will mention to you that FASB has put the treatment of goodwill back on their project list. So over the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be deliberating. Historically, we used to amortize goodwill over 40 years. That was considered very arbitrary. And they acknowledged that some goodwill goes on into perpetuity and is never impaired, and other goodwill could very well have a very short life because of a surprise, perhaps like in this story. And so it should be written down. So that's how they got to this. We ought to just check it every year. But it turns out that it's very expensive and very subjective to check it every year. And so they're revisiting whether that's the best model. So stay tuned, because there might be a change to it.